You know, you can talk about windmills. They litter our country. They're littered all over.
On January 20th, 2025, President Trump signs an executive order temporarily withdrawing all areas on the outer continental shelf from offshore wind leasing. While existing leases in the withdrawn areas are not impacted by this provision, the executive order gives the Secretary of the Interior the power of terminating or amending any existing wind energy leases. Additionally, the President calls for a sweeping review of federal wind leasing and permitting practices. It also halts the development of one specific onshore wind project called Lava Ridge that is on federal land in Idaho. The new administration seems to be tightening the screws for American offshore wind, a nascent industry already plagued by supply chain disruptions and a high interest rate inflationary environment. So, what does this mean for the future of offshore wind in the United States? Watch this video to find out.
Offshore wind was set to be a key part of the clean energy transition in the U.S. under the previous administration. The Biden administration set to achieve 30 gigawatts of offshore energy production by 2030. They approved 11 commercial-scale offshore wind projects worth 9 gigawatts of energy generation. That's enough to power almost 2 New York cities. The Inflation Reduction Act, signed in 2022, created a number of important tax credits and financial incentives that revived offshore wind financing. So if offshore wind seems so great, what prompted this new moratorium? The executive order cites intermittency, high costs, and threats to marine life as its core reasoning to block offshore wind. Indeed, certain environmental groups are concerned with offshore's impact on marine fauna, especially North Atlantic right whales, as offshore products change the soundscape in the adjacent area and introduce electromagnetic fields that could impact the mammal's navigation. Interestingly, Harvard law scholars point out that this concern over whales directly contradicts other executive orders which seek to bypass both the National Environmental Policy Act and the Endangered Species Act to accelerate fossil fuel energy production, including oil and gas development on the very same outer continental shelf where wind is now banned. So what happens now to the projects that were previously under development? In the Atlantic region, there were 3 future leasing areas identified by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management: Central Atlantic 2, New York Bight 2, and Gulf of Maine 2. The executive order puts all of these leases on halt. Meanwhile, by last May, there were 15,000 megawatts worth of offshore wind projects awaiting a green light to start construction, most of the future generation coming from New Jersey and Massachusetts. Now, the President directed all relevant agencies to not issue new or renewed approvals, rights of way, permits, leases, or loans. But it's not just potential permits that are at risk. The executive order has impacted projects that have already received federal leasing approval. In early February, the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities canceled its 4th offshore wind solicitation for the Atlantic Shores project. The NJBPU President, Christine Gull-Saldivi, pointed to uncertainty driven by federal actions and permitting as a reason for the cancellation. We also interviewed a New Jersey environmental scientist with a background in offshore wind to explain how the executive order may impact offshore goals.
Given that there are quite a few lease areas in New York and New Jersey, the first provision, at least in the near term, is not really problematic for our goals. The other provisions, and also a comprehensive review of the process overall, with no specified timelines on either of those efforts, that makes it more difficult to have certainty about wind development.
So what can states do if federal leasing is frozen?
Under the Submerged Lands Act, states have jurisdiction within 3 nautical miles from the coastline. There are successful cases of offshore projects done at this distance, such as the 30-megawatt Block Island wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island. Some of the benefits of developing small-scale projects in state waters are avoiding restrictions that only apply to federal waters and having lower transmission costs. But is this approach worth the investment? We asked Tyler Hansen, a research assistant at Dartmouth College's Offshore Wind Lab, to shed some light on this.
When you're comparing it to Vineyard, which is 800 megawatts, or a normal utility-scale project, that's 1 gigawatt. CVOW is 2.6 gigawatts. You can't do that in the state waters.
If state-level offshore projects won't solve the problem, states can turn to other renewable energy sources like solar and onshore wind.
If you think about onshore wind, the Trump administration is also going to create uncertainty there.
Right.
But costs are so low for onshore wind, it's so well established that increasing uncertainty somewhat is not going to be as big, as significant of an obstacle moving forward for projects.
Offshore wind developers and regulators may be playing a waiting game right now, but some, like Tyler, hold out hope for the future of the industry in the long term.
I think there are enough projects in the works now, and there's a lot of interest along the East Coast. They really do need offshore wind if they're going to meet clean energy goals. So yes, I'm cautiously hopeful that it's not the end of the industry, even though it is a major setback.